All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce my next guest, one of TV's favorite sitcom kids, Ritchie Petrie from the Dick Van Dyke Show. Put your hands together for Larry Mathews.
Jeff, hey man, how you doing?
I am great. How are you?
I'm just wonderful, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and we're gonna have a little fun and talk about a bunch of cool stuff today. Whatever you want.
Awesome. I will say I think I don't know that anyone doesn't love the Dick Van Dyke Show. It was on a little before I was born, but because I knew we were talking on Tubi, I just started watching
Mhm.
episode after episode. And I'm sure over years I've seen episodes and clips and stuff like, what I mean? Like, but holy cow, is this show is solid watching it right now as I can imagine. It's impressive how good it is.
It's funny because being on it when I was a child and watching when I was a child, I would watch obviously my scenes and performances stuff, but watching reruns and growing and growing and growing and then going back and watching them over and over again, it never gets tiresome. I always laugh at things that I didn't understand when I was younger because now I'm like, oh my God, that was really funny, right? And the episodes are timely or timeless, I should say, because Carl made a point not to do any shows on current subjects or current political events or anything that would date the show because he's such a genius and he wanted it to be able to run forever. So he wanted all the subjects to be forever. In other words, poignant for everybody over all times and all families.
He definitely succeeded. I want to get back to I want to dive in and I want to hear every story ever about the Dick Van Dyke Show. We got 15 hours together and we're
Excuse me. See, there you just said it already.
yeah. But but um but first I did want to a mutual friend, Marsha Posner Williams, introduced us. And you also, after being a renowned child actor, you worked on Soap and Benson. Talk to me about that. Soap is like one of those obsessive sitcoms, like, just with the controversy and Benson's so great.
I was fortunate enough when I got out of school. I went to UCLA, and when I got out of school, I went to work for Danny Thomas Productions, which was Danny was one of our executive producers on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and a guy named Ronald Jacobs, who also was our associate producer. Anyway, that kind of leapfrogged me into an introduction with Tony Thomas and going to work for Whit Thomas Harris in those years with Soap and Benson on the air. An amazing experience, a great show. So one of the things I'm very proud of being able to be part of. Groundbreaking in so many ways. Soap was controversial, almost never made it on the air because it was so controversial with the characters they had. And I'm sure Marcia has talked about this with you as well. The whole rigmarole that we went through to basically just make sure it aired. But such a great cast. I mean, again, you talk about, casts that work together so seamlessly. And so the chemistry was so perfect with all of them. And again, like we said about the Dick Van Dyke Show earlier, I watched Soap episodes that I've seen over and over again, and I just can't stop laughing. It was such a great show, so well written, so well conceived, and again, very poignant for the time that it was on.
What did you do when you were at? So what was actually your
I managed post production for several of their shows there. So post Soap Benson. A couple of years after, we had a show called It's a Living On, and then when Soap got canceled, I left with Thomas and went on to do like the rest of my career, which has been mostly all behind the scenes, and I like to think fairly successful because I had a pretty good career. So yeah.
so you would consider you're one of the child stars from that era that I don't want to say survived, like, but I mean, there's no stories about you, is there? At least that I didn't dig up.
Well, not that I've let out, but anyway,
Yeah.
that's no. Um, no, I mean, listen, I loved my time as a child star. I was really proud of it. I'm very lucky. I was blessed to be given that opportunity. I worked with some of the greatest people in our business ever, 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 and ever will be. Icons, amazing. You know, Carl Reiner, Dick, Mary, Sheldon Leonard, Maury Amsterdam, Rosemary. I think it just goes on and on. Our whole cast and crew was just amazing. And I'm also one of seven children. So I was raised in a Catholic, Italian, Sicilian Catholic family. So we were the perspective was kept very much by my parents in terms of this is not a big, this is nothing. You're nobody special, which was kind of nice. You're doing a good job. You're having a good time, and this is what we do. And when it's done, and we move on with life. So it's kind of, comes from that background with the family, and I'm really appreciative of that because it did give me the opportunity to go on and like I said, just have a really successful career in post-production, post-production, sales, and kind of bring that to my work. So I wasn't really, I wasn't one of those crazy kids that, had to go out and do crazy stuff. Although I did, but I got over it. It's okay.
Everyone does. I think all kids do kid stuff, but like there's no like crazy stories released of drugs or this or that. You know what I mean? So, Larry, when the Dick Van Dyke Show ended after 5 years, and did you want to continue acting? Was that something you wanted to do, or was it like a weird like what was it like when that was over? Because back then I'm just my perception of back then was typecasting was like a thing. When someone saw you as this character, that you were that character for a long time.
It's funny you say that, and I'll give you a couple insights as we go through. So, the Dick Van Dyke Show was my second family basically because I grew up. I was five, a little over 5 when we started. I was almost 11 when we finished. And as I say to people, I went from age 5 to 15 in 5 years because I worked with adults all the time. So you learn amazing. Your learning is incredible, and you just absorb so much and of that adult world. So when it was over, it was kind of a mixed feeling. Back to what you're asking. I was sad. I was very sad because I realized that I wasn't going to be with these people that I'd grown up with every day, and that made me very sad. And I was going to miss them. I also was okay going and just being part of like, regular whatever kids do, going back to school, doing out sports when I could, and just hanging out with, the guys and my brothers. And so I was okay with that. So it was kind of a mixed feeling. I was sad, but I wasn't, horribly disturbed by it. But then as the years kind of went through, I mean, I was a theater arts major, and I did a lot of theater, after the Dick Van Dyke Show, volunteer theater, some, little playhouses down on Melrose in LA, in Hollywood, and productions in school and high school and college, et cetera, et cetera. So I tried to keep my part in it, as much as I could, but still give myself that opportunity to just live a regular kind of normal life, if you will.
What was it like going back to school after being on such a huge sitcom and entering civilian life again, if you will?
It was horrible. My first, I shouldn't. So I skipped a grade when I was on the Dick Van Dyke Show. So I went from first to third grade because you're with a tutor one-on-one. So you learn very quickly. And again, as I said, I'm around adults. So I learned very quickly and was, so when I went back to my grade school, which was an 8-year, first through 8th grade, I was a year younger than all the rest of the kids. And in our terms now as adults, a year doesn't mean anything, but as kids, it means the world when you think about it, right?
Everything. Yeah. It's 10 years. Yeah.
So it was tough. They were, it was very, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but very, oh, you think you're better than everybody and you're not, and kind of like very much wanted to pick on the child star that would, wasn't there 6 months of the year and was there at the last 2.5, right? Or whatever it was that I ended up being in school those last 2 months. And then the last couple of years. So I didn't really have a great experience in my grade school outside of the Dick Van Dyke Show. But conversely, when I went to high school, and I went to high school in Sherman Oaks, it was great. It was the greatest experience. I loved my high school because they didn't look at me as the spoiled brat kid who just came in when he wanted to and like, oh, you get special treatment, blah, 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 and just the kind of bullying and all that stuff that happened when you were kids. They looked at me as like the brother of my 2 older brothers who was there and a really cool kid because, hey, you were on a great show, the Dick Van Dyke Show. And they embraced me and I loved my high school. So kind of a dichotomy there where, one was, very not great. The other was really great. So, that's kind of how it progressed and then on to college after that. So.
In college, probably the same thing, right? Just
same thing. But I got into a fraternity and it was cool. And we were more I just wanted to go, smoke weed and drink and do drugs and shit when I was in college because it's what every college kid does, can I tell you, back in the 70s.
Breaking news right now, Ritchie.
It's not that.
I'm kidding. So, yeah, kids can be, school's rough as it is. Did you have a crew though? Was there the pro Larry crew like in pre-high school and middle school, like they could recognize the coolness that you were on TV?
Yeah, there was a handful of guys. There was probably 4 or 5 guys that I kind of hung with and were pretty close, and they thought it was cool, and they were really happy to just be friends. And it wasn't even so much about being the Dick Van Dyke Show. I think it was just me, and they were just happy to have a friend, and because I'm a genuine person, I like to believe I am. And I didn't really make a big deal out of being the Dick Van Dyke Show. To me, it was like kind of over and done. As I told you with my family, my dad said, don't, be humble all your life. Don't be like arrogant about anything. And so I think that kind of led to some really good friendships. And the fact that I was on the Dick Van Dyke Show was just kind of another cool thing, but it was just a little part of everything else that was going on.
All right. Well, let's go back in time. So I read stories about your mailman. Oh, wait, let that sit for a second. No. The setup to that story sounds a lot more salacious than.
Well, one of my brothers doesn't look like the rest of us, so you just figure that out, okay? I'll just leave that.
So your mailman helped discover you?
Yeah, so basically, again, in Burbank, where I grew up, and he was our mail guy, and I was the one that I would like watch TV. I remember. I have memories back to when I was 3 years old of just like mimicking television and the Chipmunks and, just trying to be out there and be just this, obnoxious, always on the spotlight kid. Right. So the mailman kind of recognized that and said to my mother, look, I know a woman who gives lessons to child acting lessons. Right. And, if you want, I can set you up with her. So he did. My mom asked me, I remember, and she said, you want to go do this? And I was like, sure. And I can pretend I'm somebody else. And I love that. So let's do it. Right. And I did and took lessons for her for a while. And then they would have showcases where they would invite agents and we would do scenes, like I did a scene from 1,000 Clowns, which is a famous play. And the agents said, we'd love to represent Larry. And so we signed that deal up, and they did. And I got sent on the interview with Carl Reiner, and the rest, as they say, is history. I was in the right place at the right time. It came down to me and one other kid that they were considering. A couple funny stories with that. And in the end, Carl went with me. He wanted somebody who'd never really done anything. So that's how he was leaning toward me. And then there's a cool story about our director, Jay Sandrich, who directed Soap, which is so funny because I reunited with him later. But Jay Sandrich was the assistant director on Make Room for Daddy, or the Danny Thomas Show. And Danny was our executive producer. And they were in the room with my picture and this other kid's picture on the table one time. And Jay Sandrich came in and they were trying to decide which one to pick for Ritchie. And Jay Sanders came in. Jay told me this story when we were doing soap, actually. I just love this. And he was talked to Danny about something on that show this week, and he was getting ready to leave. And I said, wait, Jay, come back. Danny says, which one of these kids should be the kid of the son for Dick Van Dyke on this new pilot we're doing, the Dick Van Dyke Show? And Jay just went, that one, and pointed to my picture, just out of the blue. And Carl goes, that's what I was thinking. I'm glad you didn't. And that's kind of what happened. So it's kind of cool.
That is really, 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 really cool. I was reading a book. Ruth Birch said you had said you had it sewn up after the first audition, regardless of how it turned out. That everyone, everyone loved your adorableness and your cute little guy. You're a cute little guy. And let's see, there was this quote that Reiner felt Larry's utter lack of, how do you pronounce this word? Precocity? 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 Precocity put him in a distinct advantage in the running for the role. They loved you. They just loved you. You just had an innateness of love. Did it also help you that you were an unknown?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's interesting to hear those things with Ruth, who I love to death. Ruth was a very wonderful person. And of course, Carl, as I said, who was leaning toward me anyway. And then Jay just kind of put that little exclamation point on it. And, but yeah, I think it did help that I was an unknown. And I think that Carl loved that because he wanted somebody they could just let become Ritchie, basically, and work with Dick and Mary and grow that character into being their son. And I think if you watch the shows, and I watch them now, like we were talking earlier, I was very critical of my performance as I grew through the years. I'm like, oh man, and now as I watch them back and I kind of take a step back and look and I go like, you believed I was their son. I mean, it was a good, it was a good fit with the three of us, I think. And I did some pretty cool stuff on that show. I was pretty proud of what happened and how it all came out. So, yeah.
I agree. The family dynamic, even the work dynamic, like every dynamic that's displayed on that show, when Dick Van Dyke's at work, with Rose and Maury, like all of them feel like there's years beyond what you're seeing in the show, which was all right. So wait, since we practiced it earlier, so this, when you got the role of Dick, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. We might have to edit this. Our fire alarm just went off.
Oh,
in our building where we live, which I think it's a false alarm, but I don't know. Do you want to pause recording for a minute and come back, or do you want to just keep going?
I can't hear it.
You can't hear it?
No.
Okay. If you can't hear it, I'm good. We can just keep going, and that's okay, because it'll eventually shut off. And anyway, as long as you can't hear it on your recording, it's okay. Let me do this too. I'm gonna close the door here real quick. Oh, that makes a big difference. Okay, that's cool. Let's do that too. All right, as long as you're good, buddy, we can just keep rolling.
Yeah. I don't. I can't hear it as long as you're safe.
I'm good. I'm fine.
I'd hate for the big story of this interview is Larry Burns during podcast interview. God forbid. So, okay. So this is when you change your name from Larry Mazzeo to Larry Mathews. Did I nail it? Did I get it right?
You did. That's absolutely correct. Yep. Yeah. It was one of those things they wanted to do. Look, back in the 60s, ethnicity wasn't in, you know what I mean? I want to go back for a second to something we were talking about, and then we'll get back to this if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Which was the dynamics in the office with Maury and Rosie and Dick. And you hit it on the head. It's like watching it, you would think that they'd work together forever and ever. And it was just, again, the chemistry was so incredible. And Carl, John Rich, Jerry Paris, who directed a bunch, who also played our neighbor, they would let those guys just go off and do ad-libs during scenes sometimes. They would just let them go. You know, Maury would come up with something. Rosie might say something. And they go, just run with it, man, run with it. So it was scripted, yes, but there was a lot of little quick, you know, back and forth jokes, things like that were just kind of them coming up with things because they worked together so well. So I think that also made it a timeless, amazing show, you know, because the dynamics were so amazing between the people. Anyway, just wanted
to was that something that Carl Reiner encouraged? Like, because he wrote them, right? So you have to kind of assume that someone of his comedic ilk to write something would, and then feel comfortable with people then taking that beyond and making it their own and kind of bringing it to life in their own way. So that's something he encouraged.
Yes, absolutely. And so Carl wrote all the episodes for the first season. And then, and so as he watched the whole cast grow and get together in chemistry, including and especially Mary, who had never really done any comedy before, right? This was her first kind of thing, but she was brilliant at it. And Carl saw that within the first, half a year episodes. And so then he started writing a little more for her, encouraging her to do more. And of course, Maury and Rosemary were always that way, and Dick. And so, yes, Carl being the genius, and I say genius I don't know if there's any more, words that can describe how amazing this man was to me in my life. And we can talk about that later if you want. But for him to be able to see that, understand it, and basically go with it and let that become very very serendipitous, you know what I mean, in terms of just letting the show flow itself, was amazing. And Carl was like that. And I can't say enough about him.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into that. I did have one question, and keep in mind, feel free to smack down any of these side notes that I come up with, because you can only, if I read something on the internet, you're my truth detector now.
Hey, no problem.
So when they started writing more for Mary Tyler Moore, did that cause problems between Mary Tyler Moore and Rosemary?
Absolutely. That is a true statement. And Rosemary admitted it. So the way it all kind of came down, Dick, so a little history, I'm sure most people listening to the show know this, but just to reiterate. So the Dick Van Dyke Show was originally, the pilot for what became the Dick Van Dyke Show was originally a show called Head of the Family, which Carl Reiner starred in. And he made it with different cast, and it didn't sell to CBS. Sheldon Leonard happened to see it and went to Carl and said, I think this is a great idea and could be an amazing show, but you're not the guy to do it. I'm sorry, you're just not him. Would you allow me to recast this and do another pilot with a new cast in it? And Carl said, of course I would, So they were both at Bye Bye Birdie in Broadway. They went to see Dick Van Dyke, and they saw him, and immediately they just went, that's our guy. So Dick was the first guy cast. Then Rosemary was the second person cast. Maury was after that, because Rosemary said, look, if you need another writer, talk to Maury. They've been friends and they worked together for years and years. I was the next person to be cast, believe it or not, before Mary. And then Mary was the last person to be cast. Because Carl just didn't find anybody he just felt that was right until he interviewed her, and he said the spark went off like that. He grabbed her by the head, which you'd be sued for now. But anyway, he said, and walked her into Sheldon and Danny and said, this is Laura Petrie. I found our Laura Petrie. She's perfect. There was, again, Carl Reiner just so brilliant that he found that. So yes, Rosemary was, going to be one of the big main characters in it. And as they started kind of writing a little more for Mary, there was some jealousy. There's no question. And again, Rose admits this. She said it in her book. She said it on several occasions. And you never really saw it on the set because they were both such consummate professionals that it never came out on screen ever. But behind the scenes, there was something happening. And then finally in the last, there we go, it stopped. In the last season or so, Rosemary kind of understood and just kind of the two of them kind of got together and just said, look, this, let's just stop. We don't need to be this way because we're all having a great time, doing great. It's a great cast, et cetera, et cetera. So, but yeah.
Interesting. Mary Tyler Moore was great in that show. I mean, they were all great, but like for them having doubts or her not having done comedy and just watching it, it's just like, oh, it's hard to believe she didn't walk into that as a natural. But,
Isn't it? Isn't it? I agree. She was just so great. And her timing was just unbelievable for somebody that had never done anything. She just got, again, this speaks to what a professional and what a talent Mary really was. She might have been, of all of us, the best actor, you know what I mean? In terms of just being Dick was kind of being himself, that was Dick. I was being myself. Maury and Rose were kind of that whole, that old back and forth banter between them, which they'd done before, but it just came natural for them. But Mary worked at it and was really amazing. So.
yeah, no, yeah, totally. So a lot of Ritchie is you, right? Right? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think a lot of it is. Absolutely.
So this is what we're seeing on the show is what your mailman saw going up and down the street. Like this is you were just that kind of whip smart, whip funny, kind of outgoing, gregarious,
Yep. I mean, I think so. Like I said, I trying to be as humble as I can about it. But yes, I believe that was it. I just was, and the thing was, I had such great direction, with Carl and John Rich and Dick and Maury. I mean, Dick and Mary, I should say, and Maury too, and Rose, because Rosemary and I were very, very close, all to up to her death. We were very close. But Mary on set, she would we'd be rehearsing and she would say, she would give me little hints and advise, well, don't you do this and do this and this. John Rich, who was our director for the first season, was a great man. Same thing. Well, Larry, and but once they gave me a little direction, it was kind of easy for me to follow that direction and just slide into what the character was supposed to be.
Did you just love every second being a kid on that set? And
I did. Absolutely. It was such a special time in so many ways. And yeah,
What other TV kids were, this was on Desilu Studios, right? What other like TV kids were around hanging out at the soda shop between takes?
Well, it's interesting. We were on the Desilu Cahuenga lot. So there were two Desilu lots. There was one, which is now the Paramount lot on Melrose, and I got to remember Vine, I think, or Vine. Yeah. Anyway, and then there was our lot, which is on Cahuenga and Willoughby over in the other. It's just not far from there, and they had the two lots. So on our lot, at the same time we were filming, when we first started the Dick Van Dyke Show, Make Room for Daddy, the Danny Thomas Show was right next to us. So Angela Cartwright and Rusty Hamer were there. So I would go see Angela quite a bit. Rusty was kind of a little bit to himself, but I mean, I knew him, but it wasn't like we did. But Angela and I would kind of do things and, just kind of hang out sometimes. Excuse me. And then down the lot was Andy Griffith. So Ron Howard was there. And Ron Howard and I grew up in Burbank together and actually played in Little League together when we were kids. So Ron was there. So I would see them. And then farther down the lot, there wasn't a lot of other kid actors, but the Joey Bishop show was being done. I Spy was being shot on our lot. And so actually, Bill Cosby and Robert Culp taught me how to throw a football when I was a kid. And so that's kind of interesting. And Joey Bishop. And then when Danny Thomas show stopped, Gomer Pyle moved in next to us. So I became knew pretty well Frank Sutton and Ronnie Shell, who was just the most wonderful man in the world, and Jim Neighbors, also just a wonderful, wonderful man. So I was around a lot of that. From the kids side of it, I didn't really see a lot of kids except when we would do events or things where they would bring the CBS kids together for some kind of photo thing or some kind of, a promotional thing or something like that. But I'd met most of the kids over the time, Stan and Barry Livingston, I'd met. And, now, of course, Stan's a good friend. Barry's a good friend. John Provost from Lassie, very, very dear, dear friend of ours and great man.
Timmy.
Timmy in the well. Butch Patrick, and it goes on, with a lot of the kids from that era. The Beverly Hill Kids, Donna Douglas, I knew pretty well. She was really cool. And Max Baer Jr., of course, just as, not kids, but still in that same time frame of the CBS era where we were on. So, yeah.
Almost all your friends have been on my podcast. So now I'm so glad that you're here.
That's cool. I like that.
I love talking to Timmy. His wife's awesome. Also, John Provost, his wife's
Lori's the sweetheart. I love her to death. We have a little adventure going together between John and myself. I'm helping them with a business John's doing. We can talk about that later too, if you want.
Sounds good. Yeah, talk to me about Carl Reiner and his importance in your life.
I mean, there's not enough time. You talked about we have 15 hours. I mean, I could spend 15 years and never say enough about Carl Reiner. Honestly, he's just, from everything, his creativity, his comic genius, his acting genius, his producing genius. I mean, writing. He's just is probably the greatest man, really, that I ever had the pleasure to work with in my life, honestly. And the kind of guy that, if Carl met, let's say Carl, and you had Carl and Carl said, Jeff, I'm going to be on your show. You might not see him for 10 years. And when you see him again, he'd go, hey, Jeff, how are you? He was just, that's Carl. So genuine, so amazingly perceptive, I might not see Carl for 4, 5, 6 years. And every time, hey kid, hey Larry, how you doing? Big hug, kiss on the head, and just the most amazing man. And actually a great thing when we did the Dick Van Dyke Revisited show, which was in 2004, we did that, which was, Carl always wanted to do another Dick Van Dyke thing, but he didn't want to do just the regular old reunion clip kind of show. You know what I mean? He wasn't in it. So he wrote a script of the Dick Van Dyke Show 40 something years later, right? Where Dick and Mary had moved into the city and Ritchie was now in the house in New Rochelle. And Alan Brady wanted to hire Rob and Sally, because Maury was dead by that time, to write his obituary eulogy so he could approve it before he died. So nobody said anything bad about him after he was dead. It was perfect Alan Brady when you think about it, right?
Right.
So the beginning of it was me going into the living room of the Petrie living room and picking up the phone and doing a phone conversation with Alan Brady. And we kind of got in there. We read through the script a couple times, and then we started to rehearse it. And Carl, I remember we did one rehearsal, and Carl, he just kind of had this look on his face, and he's like, and he was kind of trying to think, I think, of something. And I said, Carl, I said, tell me what Ritchie is. Tell me where you want me to go with this. What's Ritchie? What's his, what's going on with Ritchie? What's going on with Alan Brady, this and that. And tell me where you want, where Ritchie is right now. And he said, well, and he gave me the direction. He said, well, look, Ritchie's done. He doesn't, Alan Brady made his dad's life miserable as far as he's concerned, F Alan Brady, it's like Ritchie's, and he gave me the direction. I said, okay. We ran the scene and he just stopped and he looked at me and went, that's perfect. He goes, that's perfect. And I went, well, no. He said, that was perfect, he said. So after we did the scene and we shot it and we were doing rehearsals on camera because we shot it without an audience, he came up to me and he said, he says, what have you been doing all these years? He goes, you're so good. He goes, at what this scene is thing. And it's a very short scene. And I said, well, I wish, he says, if I would have known, I would have wrote maybe more. He says, but I didn't know. He said, but you're so good. He goes, what have you been doing? I mean, and I said, well, Carl, I've done sales for, 30 something years. I act every day. I'm in sales. Right. Mm-hmm. And he kind of laughed and said, no, I know that. But I mean, really, have you done any acting? I said, no, just little things here and there, some theater and background voice stuff. And he goes, man, I guess I knew what I was doing when I cast you. He says, that was really good, he said. So that's Carl, I mean, and for me, that was just one of the most special moments of my life.
I don't remember seeing it, but I did watch somebody put together like this 15-minute version of the 2004 reunion. Are you only in the beginning then? Are you not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was in a very opening scene.
So did you not get to hang with all the rest of the cast then?
Absolutely. We shot it. And one of the provisions in my deal to do the show was I put in that the company I was working with at the time, which is a post-production facility, were guaranteed to do the post-production on the special. So not only did I hang with them, but I was asked often as a consulting of, for the post-production, like, well, we want to shoot this. Is this going to work? And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's going to be easier if you do it this way because we can cut it better that way. And, it was kind of a really cool cross between my acting and my professional career. And so we could contribute, which was really kind of very cool, actually.
That is awesome. It's got to be like a weird emotional thing, right? I mean, because some of the folks have passed away. It's been a while, so there's happy memories, there's sad memories. I mean, it's just like it's because I imagine a lot of these folks you hadn't seen in a while, right?
Yes, it is. There are very happy and very sad things about it. Yes, I miss a lot of the people. Dick and I are the only cast members alive now. Still, Dick just turned 98 in December. As I said to you earlier, Rosemary and I were very close. Our families were very close. We were like family. The Italian connection, plus she was always like my aunt, growing up. That's how she was to me. It was like we were a family. And that was so I miss her. Mary and I didn't talk often, but when we did see each other, she was always interested in what I was doing and would ask me and how I was, and and into that, and of course then Carl, Sheldon Leonard, Danny Thomas, who I worked with, after in my other part of the career, who was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man, and Sheldon, who, again, I can't say enough wonderful things about Sheldon Leonard. I mean, and then later in my life, as I said, I got a chance to work with people on a professional level other than acting, like John Rich, who directed Benson when we were doing a bunch of Bensons, and Jay Sandridge, who I talked about earlier, was directing Soap when we did Soap, and so that was very, very kind of a kind of full circle, very special thing to me to be able to have those relationships years later. And as I said to you earlier, it was Carl, but everybody, when we would do something as a get together on a interview show or a special event or something like that, when we were all together, it was like we had never been apart. Like time had just kind of stood still, and we just kind of came back into our own kind of like family, as it were.
Well, you shared an immense bond over a long period of time. And as everyone I talk to, TV family is forever.
It really is. Excuse me. It really is. And I think that when we did the Revisited show, it really showed itself, because we got around the table to do our first reading, and the characters just came right back. Like we had never been apart. and it just continued. And, of course, Jerry Van Dyke was in that, and Morgan Gilbert, who I just loved to death, who was very close. Jerry Paris, unfortunately, was gone. Maury was gone. Richard Deacon was gone. But the bulk of us were kind of with that when it happened in 2004. And again, it was like we had just kind of never left each other.
It's amazing because that was 38 years after the show went off the air.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, almost 40. Yeah, exactly.
And it's been another 20.
Yep.
Crazy how time just flies by because I imagine that doesn't seem like 20 years ago, right?
I can't believe it was 20 years ago. It seems like it was yesterday to me. But then again, it's like it's like marriage. Sometimes it seems like the longest time in the world. Sometimes it seems like the shortest time in the world. Being going on my 37th year of marriage now. So, but yeah, it just kind of, gosh, it was like 20 years ago, and we were like, man, it seemed like yesterday. And like, even when I watch some of the shows and see some of the shows we did, the Dick Van Dyke Show, I kind of remember it, like all of a sudden it just comes back to me like, oh man, that was just like yesterday. But it wasn't. It was 61 years ago. 60.
Was it easy, especially as a kid, new to acting, to perform in front of a live audience?
Yeah, it was for me because that's what I grew up in. So I didn't really know anything else besides that. And again, as a child, you don't have any fears. You don't even know what it's like to be fearful of being in front of a live audience. You just go do it, right? And it's like it's very simplistic in that way. And so yeah, it just was normal for me to be in front of a live audience, which is when I did a lot of theater and stage when between my years of the Dick Van Dyke Show and then going back into the production end of things and doing sales all my life, which was just easy for me to do because I was just used to being in front of crowds and people and being that.
I would gather you just didn't have the fear, given that most people would choose death over talking in front of people. It must, you know what I mean? Like, so it must have just been part of your personality to not even think about it, which is great. All right. So there's a different energy when you're doing it in front of a live audience. But I guess you wouldn't have the comparison though, right? So it's
yeah, I mean, that's all I knew, like I said. And it was funny because, in those days, we went on and on forever. I mean, we had a warm-up guy in soap too, because we shot soap in front of a live audience. You would they'd bring the cast and crew at the beginning of the show and introduce everybody, and then the warm-up guy would sit there and warm up the audience again, laugh and tell jokes and this and that, right, to get them ready to go watch a show and be an active part of that show, because that they were. So yeah, I just got used to it. It was just like the norm for me. I never really even knew anything else.
what was your relationship, or could you describe like your relationship with Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore during the show?
Yes. So during the show, as I said earlier, Mary was really like a second mom. She was that person. She cared. She's a professional. She would give me the hints. She would give me advice. And at one point in her book, I think it's A Life, Mary Tyler Moore, A Life, I believe is the book. She said that during those years in the show that I felt like more of a son to her than her own son, Ritchie, did, because he was never, they weren't with him a lot. He was in boarding schools or military schools or whatever. So that was pretty special. And then Mary gave me one of the greatest compliments that I just kind of, during the revisited show, that it just go to, it's one of those moments where you just sit there and go, my God, this is just a great life moment, and I will never forget. And to my grave, this will be one of the most wonderful things ever. But anyway, and then Dick being Dick, also would be very helpful, like in certain scenes where he might say, well, maybe I'm going to tell you this and you can say this to me or something, right? Just give me little hints and ups. And so Dick was kind of like a father, but more of a TV father, if that makes any sense. You know, it was the character. And so that was great. And Dick is the most wonderful human being. Dick doesn't have a bad word to say about anybody. He's just, you know what I mean? That's just Dick. Didn't even know how talented he really was when we did that show, I think. Again, very humble. And that was just Dick. And so the chemistry worked for us as a family, you know, I think, and it shows on screen. Because Dick could relate to having kids. Mary could relate to having kids. I could relate to mom and dad that, that were trying to raise me. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So here I found this on the set. This is from Dick Van Dyke's memoir. Dick Van Dyke would later recall in his memoir, Mathews would sometimes crack up the veteran actors around him with childlike humor, like jokingly referring to actress Joan Shawley, who played Buddy's wife Pickles, as Aunt Wrinkles.
Yep. Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, I did. Aunt Wrinkles. She was great. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
That's funny. So,
but true, it was fun. And the other thing was, I was kind of like, when we would be doing the scenes and I would say a line, it was the joke line, although, I was like the straight man, but I would give the joke line that they were right for me, right?
Right.
And everybody started laughing, and I'd have to kind of go like, don't laugh, because I wanted to laugh because it was, it was funny, right? And everybody was laughing at the same time, but we got through it. They did a good job editing. It was fine.
Oh, man. So, and then, all right, this is just random IMDb trivia. You ended up with Carl Reiner's desk from the show?
Alan Brady's desk. Correct. I did. I had it for, God. Oh, wait a second. I got it in 1978. And I gave it to the Jamestown Museum of Comedy, which is the Lucille Ball Museum of Comedy, which is in Jamestown, New York, in 2019. So I had it for all those years. It was a great story how I got it. So when I worked for Danny Thomas, Ronnie Jacobs, they had a bunch of furniture stored at a soundstage in MGM down in Culver City. And MGM came to Ronnie Jacobs and said, hey, we want our stage back. You got to move all your stuff out. Well, it was all sets from all the shows they had done for over the years. They just stored all the furniture there. And Ronnie came to me and the guy I was working with at the time and said, look, if you guys want anything, just take it. We don't care. Just if you want something there you want, take it. And the guy I was working with, Chet, he says to me, he goes, hey, there's a really cool desk you might want. And I'm like, okay, because I needed a desk. I was out of college. And I'm like, I don't have a desk. I want to get a desk for my, And I saw this desk and I went, wow, this is cool. And this thing weighed a ton, man. I mean, it was old school desk. It wasn't like today when they build them in their, no, this was solid walnut or, whatever the hell they made it out of. It was just amazing. And I got that along with a chair and I carried it house to house. But I mean, we had to take the legs off to get into rooms, put the legs back on. It was a massive piece of furniture. And I'm sitting one day at the desk and I had one of those old little TVs that were like, it was a little 10, 11 inches, but had a little VCR in the bottom of it, and fit on the desk.
Sure.
And I'm watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, and I'm watching the episode where they give the wrong script. They'd written a script for Alan, which was slamming Alan, and it wasn't the one, but it got turned in, and so it was like, oh damn. So Rob has to break into Alan's office and steal the script back before Alan reads it. And so he's in there at the desk and he's trying to open the desk, and I'm sitting there looking at this going like, that's my desk. I'm like, I had no idea. And I'm like, I'm sure it is. So I watch him do something. I'm like, I tore the door. Wait, that's my desk. That's a desk I have. So then I was like, wow. Then like a little bit later, they had the episode where Alan Brady, Laura told the people Alan Brady was bald, coast to coast big mouth, and he had all the wigs lined up on the desk. And I saw it again. I went, that is my desk. Oh my God, I have Alan Brady's desk. I didn't even know it for, a long time. And so, yeah, now it's in the museum back in Jamestown. So, yep.
That is hilarious. That's a great story. So random trivia is I found about the Dick Van Dyke Show is the last full run show to be fully in black and white before everything had to go to color. Like it never shifted to color. It was something like the last show to do its full run in black and white. There we go.
Well, that's probably true. So Carl was offered, CBS came, I think it was in our 4th or 5th season, and said, hey, look, we can do color if you want. And Carl went, no, I don't want to. It's going to change the show. I don't want to do that. Carl always planned like 5 years. That was his kind of thing. He wanted to get a 5-year run. We could have gone longer, but Carl decided to end it on a high note. Dick had a lot of offers from other things, and so it just worked out where that was the right timing for it. And keep in mind, back then, we did 36 episodes a year. It wasn't like now where you do 20 episodes of a show.
Right.
We did
some 8, right? Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Exactly. So he had his run. We had our run. It was great, and they said, well, we can do the show in color, and Carl said, no. I don't want to. I don't want it to be different from the other 4 or 5 seasons. I want it to be the same forever and ever. And I think we were that last holdout that waited till the show ended until everything went into color after that.
It was probably a solid move because at some point there would have probably been, we'll just rerun the color episodes, right? They probably at some point, somebody, because who can handle black and white?
Right.
I mean? Yeah.
Right. I think, and I just think, again, speaks to how much of a genius and how brilliant Carl Reiner, was.
Absolutely. So, okay. So we mentioned Soap earlier, and as everyone knows, Soap is considered the most controversial sitcom in the history of ever, depicting women proclaiming love for priests and depictions of sexuality, all this kind of crazy stuff. But the Dick Van Dyke Show, no stranger to controversy, perhaps. If I may point out, Mary Tyler Moore wore pants and not a dress. Shudder. Let's give everyone a second to collect themselves. And it depicted a female comedy writer. What?
Yeah, it was. And it was very groundbreaking and like you said, controversial. And there was several things that became controversial over the years with us. First of all, with Mary's pants, the network went to Carl and said, she can't wear those. And he said, well, why? And Mary said, why? I want to wear them. And they said, well, because the pants are tight, so it makes your butt look it undercups your butt and makes your butt look too sexy. And there was a big thing about that. And they're going, Carl went, no, stop it. So they fought that battle and won. And got away with that. And Mary was, again, not the typical housewife running around in a beautiful frock doing, vacuuming and all that stuff. So that was a groundbreaking kind of thing right off the bat. I had to pick of them. Yes, a female comedy writer, which, by the way, was based on true, because when Carl Reiner wrote for Your Show of Shows, which is Sid Caesar, which is what he based the Dick Van Dyke Show on, his own life, one of his co-writers was Selma Diamond. And that's where that character came from. But the Dick Van Dyke Show made that character a force. And I can't tell how many people in my life, including we talked about John Provost's wife, have come to me over the years and said, Sally Rogers was my inspiration to be an independent woman and to be the woman that a strong independent woman and do my own career and do my own thing. Heard it over and over and over again. So that was another groundbreaking thing. And then I think probably the most groundbreaking episode we ever did in terms of commentary and social commentary was called That's My Boy. And it was a flashback where Rob was talking about how Ritchie came home from the hospital and they thought that they had switched babies and Rob and Laura had somebody else's baby. Because their name was Peters, it was Petrie's. Laura got their flowers. she got all the Peter's gifts. Peter's got Petrie's gifts because it was, and Rob was convinced that they'd switched the baby, and he had the Peters baby, and the Peters had the Petrie baby. And so he goes through this whole thing with Jerry Paris and they take a ink pad and put it on my foot to make sure it matches the footprint on the baby stick. Anyway, so they say, look, we have these people over. Calls them and says, look, you have something of ours and we have something of yours. Says, yes, we have your flower. Well, I think it's more than that, Rob says, but come over and we'll meet you. The doorbell rings, the door opens, and in steps Gregory Morris, who was black, and his wife, who was black. That Rob thought they had switched the babies with the black family. And it's the longest still recorded live laugh in the history of television. We had to stop the cameras, let the laugh go and go and go and go and go and come back and reset and do it again because the audience just could not stop laughing. And especially because when you look at Dick's reactions, it was just like his reactions, his physical comedy is so amazing, right? And they come in and the line Dick says, why didn't Rob says, why didn't you tell me? And Greg Moore says, are you kidding? And missed the reaction on your face. So that was like a huge ground. And the network fought us on that. Carl had to go, and Sheldon had to go fight the network to get that script done. And it was the first script that Sam Denoff and Bill Persky ever wrote for the Dick Van Dyke Show. And they ended up being our story, our head writers for the last 3 years of the show. 3.5.
That is the greatest. Thank you for sharing that. Interestingly enough, if you love the Dick Van Dyke Show, apparently you owe Procter & Gamble a thank you because the show was canceled after season 1 and they threatened to boycott and pull from all their ads because they loved the show so much.
Excuse me. Well, that's a part of it, and maybe a little bit embellished. But what happened was, back in those days, shows had sponsors. There wasn't like now, right, where the network picks you up and then the network goes out and gets sponsored. Procter & Gamble was our sponsor, and that was who basically paid for the commercials and for the Dick Van Dyke Show. So the show didn't do well in the ratings the first year. We were up against Perry Como, and Perry Como was like the king of television on that night, right? And so it got canceled. Sheldon went to Procter & Gamble and said, look, I think this show deserves another chance. Are you willing to back me up if I go to the network and say that I want them to rerun it, and then you guys will support, pay for reruns and do be the sponsoring reruns and get it picked up? And Procter & Gamble went, yes, we will, absolutely. So Sheldon went back to William Paley, the head of the network and CBS, and said, look, this show deserves a better chance. Procter & Gamble is willing to continue sponsoring it, and they don't want to have to not sponsor other shows. Will you put the show on reruns during the summer? And if the show does well in reruns, will you pick it up for another season? He said yes, they did. The show took off in reruns. They moved it from another night instead of up against Perry Como. And then the last 4 years, we won more Emmys than any other show at the time in the history of television, until Cheers, believe it or not.
That's an excellent segue. I have it. 15 Emmys, like you said, up until that time, the most Emmys ever. And other accolades include 2 episodes that rank as number 8 and 15 in the top 100 episodes of all time. In 2002, the show was ranked number 13 of the 50 greatest TV shows of all time. And in 2013, the Writers Guild of America ranked it number 14 on their list of the 101 best written TV shows ever. So that's, I mean, you think about it, like in 2013, a show that ended its run in 1966 was ranked number 14. That's a lot of years to knock Dick Van Dyke Show out of the top 100. There's a bazillion shows a year. So it just goes to show what an amazing show the Dick Van Dyke Show was. You were an amazing part of it. It's such a must be so compelling to be part of such TV history. So
It's as I said earlier, very blessed, very fortunate, very proud of it. And yeah, I'm even to this day, sometimes, Jeff, I sit there and go like, God, was I really on that show? Man, oh man. It's like, I'm like, wow, it's kind of mind boggling still to this day. And, 63 years later or whatever it was. Right. And just a question. Did they mention the two episodes that were ranked? What was it, number 4 and something else you said or something?
yes, give me 1 second. Okay, great question. Of those 2 episodes, the episodes Coast to Coast, Big Mouth, and It May Look Like a Walnut were ranked number 8 and 15, respectively.
Of course, some great stories about those two. So Coast to Coast, Big Mouth is the one I was telling you about, where Alan Brady Laura told the world that Alan Brady was bald, and they had the wigs on my desk. We talked about it earlier, so that was that episode, right?
Right.
It May Look Like a Walnut. Probably my favorite episode of all time. One of definitely 4 or 5, because people ask me this all the time, and I say, well, there's a lot of them, but that ranks up as right there. Was written, and it was it was kind of not the norm for one of our shows. It was kind of a stretch with the science fiction thing going on, and the whole, the planet Twilo, and Danny Thomas is the guest star, right? And playing the alien. And Sheldon Leonard went in when we read it, and he just said, "This is horrible. This is the worst script I've ever seen." He threw it on the table and said, I don't want any part of this. This is horrible. I'm not even going to be involved. This is the worst thing you guys have done. As we went through rehearsal and we got to shoot it, and Sheldon saw it edited together, he came back to Carl and said, "I was wrong. This is probably one of the funniest shows I've ever seen in my life." He goes, "You guys pulled it off. I didn't think you could. And I am so apologetic, because you were right and I was wrong." And it's kind of one of our most famous shows ever, really.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Larry, these stories are treasures. So thank you for sharing them with me. And so tell me, like, now, I know you're doing like this cool thing, celebrity wine tours. People can drink wine, hang with you, basically have their own podcast like we just did.
I know it's going to be like a personal podcast we can have a good time with. So I said, as I told you, I worked 42 years in post-production, post-production, and did sales for most of that time for post-production. And for the folks out there, post-production is the finishing part where we do editing and sound mixing and color correction and everything else to finish the show before it goes on the air. And so I retired out of that in 2020, moved up here to Oregon to live in Portland, Oregon now. And I'm working with a company called A Great Oregon Wine Tour. They can look it up online, and you can go look at the tours they offer. And one of them is a celebrity wine tour with Larry Mathews, Ritchie Petrie from the Dick Van Dyke Show. And we pick you up and we take you out to the Willamette Valley, which is one of the more famous and AVA regions for Pinot Noirs in the world. It's wins awards up and down all over the place, and Chardonnays. And we go out and we have a good time. We talk about the Dick Van Dyke Show. We talk about Hollywood. We talk about wine. We drink wine because I'm a big wine guy. That was kind of my passion. So as the owner said to me, he goes, "You're perfect, because I don't need to teach you about wine. You know more than I do almost," he says, and that's great. And it's just a fun mix. So that's what we're doing. So anybody ever comes up to Oregon or gets out here, please look us up. Come out and spend the day with me. We take you to a few different wineries, give you a nice lunch, and like I said, talk about stories from the Dick Van Dyke Show and whatever you guys want to talk about, who are with us. And of course, some great wines and a great afternoon of just knowledge and enjoyment of the wine world.
That sounds like a blast.
But yeah, I'm on Facebook, and we have the wine thing up on Facebook. Again, if they go online, it's called A Great Oregon Wine Tour, and they can see all about it. My bio's on there. whole description of what we do, and it's a lot of fun.
Amazing. Well, Larry, thank you so much for hanging out with me. This was a lot of fun.
I had a blast, Jeff. It's great. I love doing these things where people can ask, like you said, the truth teller. They can ask about things they've heard, and we can always kind of take them down the path a little bit, either elaborate on it, give them a little more details on it, maybe correct a few things that are right, but not quite 100%. But I just love doing this, and I really have had a good time with you, and it's been a lot of fun. So again, thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for being on.